over the next few weeks, we're going back into the Sermon on the Mount to hear the words of Jesus, to try and act on the words of Jesus and gain rest for our souls, to get a better life. And we're calling this series Take the Best and Run, a time when we look back over this 12 months of real chaos, things being thrown up in the air. We want to take the best of what God said to us in that time and we want to run with it. We want to run with it. We're using the Sermon on the Mount to do that. Matthew chapter 7, verse 15 to 20. Here's what Jesus says. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ferocious wolves. By your fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Question 1. Are you listening to the right prophets? Are you listening to the right prophets? Jesus says we should watch out for false prophets, for bad teachers. A prophet is someone who casts for you any aspect of a vision of salvation. It might be somebody who says this is how to have a better life. That's a prophetic cry. It could be somebody from any sphere of life who says, here's a way to rest more, to be more healthy. It's a prophetic cry. Every piece of advice on what to do next, how to take a decision, it's a prophetic cry. Who are the prophets you are listening to? Jesus shows through his ministry that he recognizes false prophets in many different locations. He does recognize the Pharisees. He says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, the teaching. It will take you to bad places, Jesus says. But then he also says about Herod, a purely secular ruler, the king, like the prime minister. And he says, go tell that fox Herod. He identifies Herod as a fox, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He recognizes these false prophets all across life. Not just in the church, in many different places, people who cast a vision of salvation, of a good life, of how to do well, of how to make decisions. I wonder if you're aware of who the prophets are in your life. If Jesus says beware of false prophets, the first thing it serves us to do is to do an audit of who are the prophets in our lives. Who are the people we've listened to, we've believed, consciously or unconsciously. For me, as I reflect on this, the first would be the Bible. I love this book. I've tried to invest myself in it for 25 years. Every day pretty much, trying to get into this book. It's a prophet in my life. But then if I think a bit more, I realise not just that, but every preacher I've really decided to listen to, the church leaders I've sat under, small group leaders I've been with, key friends who I've sat and prayed with and talked with, they've been prophets in my life as well, casting for me, this is who God is. This is what it means to live a life in his presence. And then beyond the kind of religious sphere, as it were, I think somebody like Leslie, my wife, who has clearly been for me somebody who's cast the vision of how we do life, of what it means to be good people, of what it means to be a good family. My parents, huge influence for me of what it means to be somebody living as an adult, as a parent. All the values and the things, do you not reckon, you get to those points and you think, oh, I've just seen my dad in myself. The way I acted then was so much like my mother. And then there'll be all kinds of things like the latest series we've been really binge watching or the news feed we've been taking. A whole load of voices we're probably not even conscious of have influenced us. Teachers, colleagues, friends, advertising. Jesus says, beware of false prophets. It serves us greatly to do an audit of who are the prophets, who are the voices we're listening to in our lives. Why should we do this? Why should we beware? Because Jesus says every prophet you listen to makes you like them. Every person you listen to makes you like them. He gives two very vivid illustrations. He says, inviting a prophet to come and speak to you. For example, you get out your phone and you think, I'm going to listen to this pundit, I'm going to listen to this journalist, I'm going to listen to this preacher, I'm going to watch these videos on YouTube, I'm going to read these books. Every time you do that, it's like you're inviting an animal into your house. And Jesus says, it can look like you're inviting a sheep. Oh, it'd be nice to have this sheep. I can cuddle it when I feel down, and it will probably provide me with some wool, and oh, it's so cute and nice. I'm going to invite this animal of a sheep into my house. And then you're lying in bed one night and you're just, you reach over to stroke this lovely sheep, and suddenly you're like, it's like a wolf. And you're, don't get it wrong. Every time you choose to listen to a prophet, to take on their advice, you're inviting the animal into your house. And there's certain animals I don't want in my house. I don't know about you. There's certain animals I don't want in my house. The second vivid illustration Jesus gives is that it's like food. Every time you listen to a prophet, every time you listen to the teaching, the instructions, the guidance, the advice of somebody, it's like you're eating the food that they are serving. Jesus says it's like grapes. You're wanting to eat grapes, but it's a thorn bush. You end up eating thorns. Or it's like eating figs, but in fact it's a thistle. It's like eating food. The teaching you get is like a meal you eat. When you get up in the morning, the content that you consume is actually feeding your soul and making you like the person who produced that content. That's what Jesus says. J. Pathak says this: most Christians sit in church on a Sunday and give their pastor 20 minutes to feed them truth. But all week long they feast on the prophecies and promises of their culture. That is an equation that can only lead them to one place, and it's not a good place. The last 12 months have shown us this, haven't they? A Christian's response to the killing of George Floyd, or to questions about sexuality, to the topic of Brexit, a Christian's response to very significant questions about who we are as people, are most likely going to be defined by the news cycle, the news feed they listen to. You listen to a Christian speaking, and most of the time within 3 or 4 sentences, I can work out they read this newspaper, they go on these websites. They're formed, the opinions of Christians are so often formed far more by the culture around them than by Jesus. And it's because we feast on the food fed, made for us by our culture, not on the prophecies of the great prophet, the great God, Jesus. Another thing that's been really evident in this last year, let me say this with real compassion to you, parents of teenagers. Many of us have been utterly atrocious. I mean that with great sadness. We've been utterly atrocious at equipping our teenagers in understanding how to use their phones. We've let them shut themselves in their room hours and hours on end, and they're feasting, they're shoving into their mouths the bad fruit of bad prophets endlessly. And we just sit there as if it's just something we have no power to change. I've been banging on about phone use for a couple of years, and I have to say it just feels like so many just smile and nod. Oh, that's sweet, Tom, that's nice of you. The last 12 months has shown us this. You allow a teenager free rein on their phone, shut in their room, feeding on whatever content they want, it produces horrendous fruit in their lives. So what do we do about this? Jesus says, beware. We've talked about that. Do an audit. Do you know, Jesus says most bad prophets are experts in marketing. most bad prophets, they're experts in marketing. They come in sheep's clothing, but beneath it, they're ferocious wolves. Think about what you feast on that feels so lovely. The TV shows, the journalists, we've talked about this already. Do an audit. Think about, what are you feeding yourself on? What are the animals you're inviting into your life? Secondly, once you've done that, only give ear to the people whose lives you want to be like. Only give ear to the people whose lives you want to be like. By your fruit, by their fruit, you will know them. By their fruit, you will know them. Fruit takes a while to grow. So don't be hasty in imbibing everything that somebody says. Look beyond the marketing to their relationships. Relationships so often are the indicator of the true health of the person speaking. Now, there's many Christian preachers and organisations, there's many worship leaders who have great marketing. And I'm going to speak really candidly for you on this because I think this is so important. Many of them, if you look behind the marketing, their lives are truly horrible. Their relationships are horrible. Beware. Switch those people off. Here's 2 key ways you can do it. When you come across a preacher, if they're not part of a church family, where they have good relationships with that church family, don't listen to them. Itinerant preachers, itinerant ministers who have no embedded relationships in their lives are dangerous, and we should not be listening to them. And I tell you that. Look at who you're listening to. If they're a preacher or a worship leader, if they haven't got a proof of good relationships, don't follow them, because they will feed you the food that will take you to the place where they are. No matter how impressive, no matter how titillating, no matter how gifted they seem to be, please turn them off. Thinking not just about preachers and worship leaders, but thinking about journalists and pundits and interesting voices around in our society. Again, look, we don't hold them to the same standard potentially as preachers, but we have to be conscious they do infect us, they do affect us, they do influence us. Instagram influencers are called influencers because they influence people. They affect people. So rather than just taking them at face value, look behind the marketing, see their relationships. You know, have they got multiple broken relationships? Are they people who say one thing and live another thing? Are they angry? Are they people who look like they're massively in debt? If you can't see the evidence of what their real life looks like, beware. Beware. Now, we don't want to be an echo chamber. We don't want to never listen to voices we don't believe, we don't agree with. It's helpful to have a range of different things going on in our lives, but beware about feasting or even in just hearing content, receiving content from people that you don't know if their life is one you want to be like. And a key thing is this: put a time limit. Put a time limit on content that you consume. Jesus over and over again says this: move beyond content consumption to actual running with the ideas that are true and good and right. Don't be somebody who consumes endless amounts of content, who hears the words, good and true words, and never acts on them, who never does them. Beware of those things. Jesus says the good life is found through acting on what he says. Take the best and run. Run, church, run. Don't sit there consuming more and more content. Run with the good things you already have. The last 12 months have shown me many people who know many verses from the Bible, know many of Jesus' words. Their lives have fallen apart. It's been like a deflating balloon. And if you look at it, really, one of the major things is they just don't do what Jesus says. They know what he says, but they don't do what he says. Jesus says things like, don't worry, your Father knows what you need. Like, he watches over the flowers of the field, the birds in the air, surely he'll look after you. And yet they don't act on that. They continue to worry, they continue to pursue all kinds of things, or whatever the latest news thing is. Act on the words of Jesus. The other end of the spectrum, I've seen many people who've just sought to do that. They've just sought to do what Jesus says. And of course it's still been a challenging year, but there's been some who've thrived, who've in the storm when it's hit, they've stood firm. This is the gospel that Jesus preaches. Not just forgiveness, but if you run with the words of Jesus, your confidence, your identity becomes stronger, your heart becomes richer and fuller, your mind becomes cleaner and clearer, your relationships and your interaction with the world becomes more defined by peace and joy. This is what Jesus offers as good news. And I just, being really honest, as I reflect on the last 12 months for us as a family, I'd say we've never felt more healthy. A storm has truly hit, but Jesus' words have proved to be totally reliable in my estimation. So in summary, Jesus, as he so often does, presents two options to us. If you want to ruin your life, if you want to ruin your kids' life, set no boundaries on how much content you consume. Just be on your phone as much as you want. Don't be discerning in who you listen to. Follow every latest whim. Be sucked in by the marketing of great preachers and worship leaders whose lives you know nothing about. Do what they say, feast on their food. You'll eat thorns, you'll eat thistles, you'll have wolves beside your bed. You'll ruin your life. If you want a good life, Jesus says, be aware, be wary about whose voices you listen to. Put a limit on the amount of content that you consume. Choose to actively listen to those who are good people, living lives you want to be like. Don't just hear them, but seek to apprentice yourself, to run with what they give you. You'll have a fuller heart, you'll have a clearer mind, you'll have more rest in your soul, you'll have more peace and more joy. Jesus gives us the option. Which one will you choose?